안녕하세요. 오늘은 여러분들의 월급 루팡이 아닌 여러분들의 sleeping aid가 되어드릴 김각희인데요. 뭐야 배경 예뻐요. 항상 밤에 방송하면은 요 배경이에요. 자, 인사부터 드릴까요? 웅이왔다님 안녕하세요. 벤사유님도 안녕. 마우티님도 안녕. 로역스님도 안녕. 지나가던 빌더 보여주님도 안녕. 오이너구링님도 안녕. 마우스님 안녕. 라빈 7530님도 안녕. 전 지금 아침에 라죽을 먹고 있어요. 조미캐님도 안녕. 제가 오늘 읽어드릴 책은 저번에 한번 읽어드렸죠? 별망치님 안녕. 맷 헤이그의 The Midnight Library라고 한 곡이래. 입에 붙었어 노래라는 단어가. The Midnight Library라고 하는 책인데요. 목이 잠겨서 좀 목소리가 낮을 수 있는 점 이해 부탁드리고요. 귀뚜라미랑 모닥불이랑 둘 중에 뭘 킬까 고민을 해봤는데 귀뚜라미를 키는 게 나을 것 같아. 모닥불. 귀뚜라미가 나을 것 같아. 해볼까요? 아니 아직 나 죽 좀 먹고 죽 먹고 읽어드릴게요. 짧은 하나님 안녕. 다들 자기 전에 뭐 해요? 누워서 유튜브 보다 자나요? 방송 보면서 웹소설 읽기. 웹소설을 한 번도 안 읽어봐가지고 얼마나 재밌는지 몰라. 마법녀님 안녕. 어서오세요. 자, 다 먹었어. 자, 해볼까요? 봅시다. 오늘 제가 들려드릴 이야기는 맷 헤이그의 The Moonlight Library라고 하는 노래인데요. 자꾸 노래래. Midnight Library라고 하는 책입니다. 이 책은 2022년 정도쯤에 인터내셔널 베스트셀러로 지정이 됐던 책이고요. 지금 현재 그때 당시에는 이제 200만 장 이상을 판매를 했으니까 지금 더 많이 팔렸겠죠. 그런 친구입니다. 책을 읽어주려고 하자마자 또 끊겨. 이게 왜 그러지? 무시하고 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. 그때 당시에 제가 챕터를 표시를 해놨어요. 어디까지 읽었나. 오늘은 The Book of Regrets라고 하는 노래라고 하는 챕터고요. 혹시 영어 울렁증이 있으신 분들은 이제 미리 disclaimer 미리 주의드립니다. 지금까지 읽었던 파트들은요, 다 이제 이 친구 이름이 뭐였더라? 나도 기억이 안 나. 노라입니다. 이 친구 이름이 노라인데요. 노라라고 하는 친구는요, 어릴 때부터 좀 많은 고난 같은 걸 겪었어요. 역경이 많았어. 예를 들면 할머니가 돌아가셨다든지 어릴 때. 그 다음에는 엄마가 아파서, 좀 성인이 됐을 때 엄마가 아파서 전에 살던 고향으로 갔는데 돌아가셨다든지, 뭔가 내가 하고 싶었던 수영을 하거나 뭔가 책을 미안해요. 진짜 미안해. 책을 많이 읽었던 꿈이나 책을 많이 읽어서 뭐 얼음 같은 것들을 막 이렇게 감정하는 그걸 한국말로 뭐라고 하는지 모르겠는데 하여튼 그런 것들을 뭔가 감정하고 빙질 같은 걸 확인하는 그런 직업을 가지고 싶었는데 포기했다든지 하여튼 본인의 꿈을 포기했던 적이 굉장히 많고요. 고양이도 차에 치여서 집 근처에서 죽었고요. 오늘 와이파이 상태 좀 이상한데? 하여튼 그렇습니다. 공지 올려놔야겠다. 그치, 인생이 억가다. 지금 와이파이가 좀 불안정해요. 고정해야 돼. 이미 우울증에 걸렸고요. 본인이 혼자 생을 마감하기로 마음을 먹고 생을 마감을 할 결심을 하게 됩니다. 근데 바로 이제 꽥 하고 저승으로 가는 게 아니고 어느 한 공간에 도착을 해요. 공간에 도착을 해서 보게 되는 것이 엄청 커다란 고딕스러운 건물이죠. 건물 안에 들어가 봤더니 책들이 완전 많이 널려 있고 무슨 도서관 같이 생겼어. 거기서 본인이 아주 어렸을 때 같이 체스를 하고 놀던 Mrs. Ellam이라는 선생님을 만납니다. 이 선생님을 외형을 한 사람은요, 뭐 실제로도 Mrs. Ellam인가 봐요. 이분은 도서관 사서 선생님이었어요. 와사비님 안녕, 공화매고프님 안녕, 자기야 벌써방님 안녕. 이 선생님은 사서 선생님이었는데 지금 이 저승과 이승을 이어주는 그 어딘가 사이에 있는 Midnight Library, 자정 도서관, 직역하면 자정 도서관이죠. 자정 도서관에 이제 사서로 살고 있는 상태인 거죠. 이 자정 도서관이라고 하는 이승과 저승을 이어주는 이 사이의 도서관은 무엇이냐 하면 지금까지 이 죽음의 길로 가고 있는 이 사람이, 이 어린 양이 지금까지 어떤 행동을 했고 어떤 후회를 했는지 그 후회들을 되돌아보면서 내가 이때 뭔가 다른 선택을 했으면 달라질 수 있었을까? 하는 생각을 좀 던져보는, 그리고 그때로 돌아가서 내가 살 수 있다면 내가 뭔가 지금 가지고 있는 후회나 상황들을 잘 해결한다면 어쩌면 다시 살 수 있는 그런 기회가 주어진 사람입니다. 그런 기회를 주어지게 만들어주는 도서관인 거예요. 제가 읽었던 파트 The Book of Regrets 바로 전에 있는 The Librarian이라고 하는, 아니지, The Midnight Library라고 하는 챕터에서 그렇게 내용을 다뤘었고요. 다음으로 제가 읽어드릴 파트는 The Book of Regrets라고 하는 파트입니다. 먼저 영어로 다시 얘기를 해야겠죠. It is page 34, The Book of Regrets, and I will go on from here. I'm not really sure if I can read a whole book because it's been only 24 pages since I started reading, so I will try my best to read until page 60. If I get over that, that's fine. Anyways, let's try this, okay? 찰리님 안녕. The Book of Regrets. Nora stared at it. She could see it now, the small typeface embossed on the cover. The Book of Regrets. Every regret you have ever had since the day you were born is recorded in here, Miss Elm said, tapping her finger on the cover. I now give permission to open it. As the book was so heavy, Nora sat down, cross-legged, on the stone floor to do so. She began to skim through it. The book was divided into chapters, chronologically arranged around the years of her life. 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 35. The chapters got much longer as the book progressed, year by year. But regrets she accumulated weren't specifically related to that year in question. Regrets ignore chronology. They float around. The sequence of these lists change all the time. Right? Yes, that makes sense, I suppose. She quickly realized that they range from the minor and quotidian, I regret not doing any exercise today, to the substantial, I regret not telling my father I loved him before he died. There were continual background regrets which repeated on multiple pages. I regret not staying in the labyrinths because I let down my brother. I regret not staying in the labyrinths because I let down myself. I regret not doing more of this environment. I regret the time I spent on social media. I regret not going to Australia with Izzy. I regret not having more fun when I was younger. I regret all those arguments with Dad. I regret not working with animals. I regret not doing geology at university instead of philosophy. I regret not learning how to be a happier person. I regret feeling so much guilt. I regret not sticking at Spanish. I regret not choosing science subjects in my A-levels. I regret not becoming a glaciologist. I regret not getting married. I regret not applying to a master's degree in philosophy at Cambridge. I regret not keeping healthy. I regret moving to London. I regret not going to Paris to teach English. I regret not finishing the novel I started at university. I regret moving out of London. I regret having a job with no prospects. I regret not being a better sister. I regret not having a gap year after university. I regret disappointing my father. I regret that I teach piano more than I play it. I regret my financial mismanagement. I regret not living in the countryside. Some regrets were a little fainter than others. One regret shifted from practically invisible to bold and back again, as if it was flashing on and off right there as she looked at it. The regret was, I regret not having children. That is a regret that sometimes is and sometimes isn't, explained Mrs. Elm, again somehow reading her mind. There are a few of those. From the age of 34 onwards, the longest chapter at the end of the book, there were a lot of Dan-specific regrets. These were quite strong and bold and played in her head like an ongoing fortissimo chord in a Haydn concerto. I regret being cruel to Dan. I regret breaking up with Dan. I regret not living in a country pub with Dan. As she stared down at the pages, she thought now of the man she had so nearly married. Page 36, Regret Overload. She'd met Dan while living with Izzy in Tooting. Big smile, short beard, visually a TV vet. Fun, curious. He drank quite a bit, but always seemed immune to hangovers. He had studied art and history, and put his in-depth knowledge of Rubens in Tintorito to incredible use by becoming head of PR for a brand of protein flapjacks. He did, however, had a dream. And his dream was to run a pub in the countryside, a dream he wanted to share with her, with Nora. And she got carried away with his enthusiasm, got engaged, but suddenly she had realized she didn't want to marry him. Deep down, she was scared of becoming her mother. She didn't want to replicate her parents' marriage. Still, staring blankly at the book of regrets, she wondered if her marriage was something you did at the appropriate time with the nearest available person. a game where you grab the first person you could find when the music stopped. She had never wanted to play that game. Bertrand Russell wrote that to fear love is to fear life, and those who fear life are already 3 parts dead. Maybe that was her problem. Maybe she was just scared of living. But Bertrand Russell had more marriages and affairs than hot dinners, so perhaps he was no one to give advice. When her mum died 3 months before, the wedding Nora's grief was immense. Though she had suggested that the date should be put back, it somehow never was, and Nora's grief fused with depression and anxiety and the feeling that her life was out of her own control. The wedding seemed such a symptom of this chaotic feeling that she felt tied to a train track, and the only way she could loosen the ropes and free herself was to pull out the wedding. Though, in reality, staying in Bedford and being single, and letting Izzy down about their Australia plans, and starting work at a string theory, and getting a cat had all felt like the opposite of freedom. "Oh no," says Mrs. Ellen, breaking Nora's thoughts. It's too much for you." And suddenly she was back feeling all this contrition, all the pain of letting people down and letting herself down, the pain she had tried to escape less than an hour ago. The regrets began to swarm together. In fact, while staring at the open pages of the book, the pain was actually worse than it had been wandering around Bedford. The power of all the regrets simultaneously emanating from the book was becoming agony. The weight of guilt and remorse and sorrow too strong. She leaned back on her elbows, dropped the heavy book, and squeezed her eyes shut. She could hardly breathe, as if invisible hands were around her neck. "Make it stop." "Close it now," instructed Mrs. Ellen. "Close the book. Not just your eyes, close it. You have to do it yourself." So Nora, feeling like she was about to pass out, she sat back up and placed her hand under the front cover. It felt even heavier now, but she managed to close the book and gasped in relief. Every life begins now. "Well?" Mrs. Ellen had her arms folded. Though she looked identical to the Mrs. Ellen Nora had always known, her manner was definitely a little more brusque. It was Mrs. Ellen, but also somehow not Mrs. Ellen. It was quite confusing. Well, what?" Nora said, still gasping, still relieved she would no longer feel the intensity of all her regrets simultaneously. "Which regret stands out? Which decision would you like to undo? Which life would you like to try on?" She said that, precisely. Try on. As if this was a clothes shop and Nora should choose a life as easily as a t-shirt. It felt like a cruel game. That was agony. I felt like I was about to be strangled. What is the point of this? As Nora looked up, she noticed the lights for the first time. Just naked bulbs hanging down from wires attached to the ceiling, which seemed like a normal kind of light of gray ceiling. Except it was a ceiling that reached no walls, like the floor here. It went on forever. The point is, there's a strong possibility that your old life is over. You wanted to die, and maybe you will. And you will need somewhere to go. Somewhere to land. Another life, so you need to think hard. This library is called the Midnight Library because every new life on offer here begins now. And now is midnight. It begins now. All these future, that's what's in here. That's what your books represent. Every other immediate, present, and ongoing future you could have had. So, there are no pasts in here? No. Just the consequence of them. But those books are also written, and I know them all. But they're not for you to read. And when does each life end? It could be seconds or hours, it could be days, months, more. If you have found a life you truly want to live, then you get to live it until you die of old age. If you really want to live a life hard enough, you don't have to worry. You will stay there as if you have always been there. Because in one universe, you have always been there. The book will never be returned, so to speak. It becomes less of a loan and more of a gift. The moment you decide you want that life, really want it, then everything that exists in your head now, including this Midnight Library, will eventually be a memory so vague and intangible it will hardly be there at all. One of the lights flickered overhead. The only danger, continued Mrs. Allen, more ominously, is when you're here between lives. If you lose the will to carry on, it will affect your root life, your original life, and that could lead to the destruction of this place. You'd be gone forever. You'd be dead. And so would your access to all this. That's what I want. I want to be dead. I would be dead because I want to be. That's why I took the overdose. I want to die. Well, maybe. Or maybe not. After all, you're still here. Nora tried to get her head around this. So, how do I return to the library if I'm stuck in a life even worse than the one I've just left? It can be subtle, but as soon as disappointment is felt in full, you'll come back here. Sometimes the feeling creeps up. Other times it comes all at once. If it never arrives, you'll stay put, and you will be happy there by definition. It couldn't be simpler, so pick something you would have done differently, and I will find you the book. That is to say the life. Nora stared down at the book of regrets lying closed on the yellow-brown floor tiles. She remembered chatting late at night with Dan about this dream of owning a quaint little pub in the country. His enthusiasm had been infectious, and it had almost become her dream too. I wish I hadn't left Dan, and that I was still in a relationship with him. I regret us not staying together and working towards that dream. Is there a life where we are still together? Of course, said Mrs. Elm. The books in the library began to move again, as though the shelves were conveyor belts. This time, though, instead of going as slow as a wedding march, they moved faster and faster and faster until they couldn't really be seen as individual books at all. They just whirred by in streams of green. Then, just as suddenly, they stopped. Mrs. Elm crouched down and took a book from the lowest shelf to her left. The book was one of the darker shades of green. She handed it to Nora. It was a lot lighter than the Book of Regrets, even though it was a smaller size. Again, there was no title on the spine, but a small one embossed on the front, precisely the same shade as the rest of the book. It said, "My life." But it's not my life. Oh, Nora, they are all your lives. What do I do now? You opened the book and turned to the first page. Nora did so. Okay, said Mrs. Elm with careful precision. Now, read the first line. Nora sat down and read. She walked out of the pub into the cool night air. And Nora had just enough time to think to herself, pub? After that, it was happening. The text began to swirl and soon became indecipherable. In a fast motion, as she felt herself weaken. She never knowingly let go of the book, but there was a moment where she had no longer a person reading it, and a consequent moment where there was no book. Or library at all. The Three Horseshoes. Nora was standing outside in crisp, clean air. But unlike in Bedford, it wasn't raining here. Where am I? She whispered to herself. There was a small row of quaint stone terraced houses on the other side of the gently curving road. Quiet, old houses with all their lights off, nestled at the edge of a village before fading onto the stillness of the countryside. A clear sky, an expanse of dotted stars, a waning crescent moon, the smell of fields, the two-way twit-two on tanny owls, and then quiet again. A quiet that had a presence, that was force in the air. Weird. She had been in Bedford, then in that strange library, and now she was here, on a pretty village road, without hardly even moving. On the side of the road Golden light filtered out of the downstairs window. She looked up and saw an elegantly painted pub sign creaking softly on the wind. Overlapping horseshoes underneath carefully italicized words. The 3 horseshoes. In front of her, there was a chalkboard standing on the pavement. She recognized her own handwriting as its neatest. The 3 horseshoes. Tuesday night, quiz night, 8:30 p.m. True knowledge exists in knowing which know nothing. Socrates. After losing her quiz. This was a life where she put 4 exclamation marks in a row. That was probably what happier, less uptight people did. A promising omen. She looked down at what she was wearing, a denim shirt with sleeves rolled halfway up her forearms and jeans and wedge-heeled shoes, none of which she wore in her actual life. She had goosebumps from the cold and clearly wasn't dressed to be outside for long. There were 2 rings on her ring finger. Her old sapphire engagement ring was there, the same one she had taken off, through trembles and tears over a year ago, accompanied by a simple silver wedding band. Crackers. She was wearing a watch. Not a digital one. In this life. An elegant, slender, analog one with Roman numerals. It was about a minute after midnight. How is this happening? Her hands were smoother in this life. Maybe she used hand cream. Her nails shone with clear polish. There was some comfort in seeing the familiar small mole on her left hand. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Someone was heading towards her down the driveway. A man, invisible from the light of the pub windows and the solitary street lamp. A man with rosy cheeks and gray Dickinson whiskers and a wax jacket. A Toby jug made flesh. He seemed, from his overly careful gait, to be slightly drunk. Good night, Nora. I'll be back on Friday. For the folk singer, Dan said he's a good one. In this life, she probably knew the man's name. Right? Yes, of course. Friday should be a great night. At least her voice sounded like her. She watched as the man crossed the road, looking left and right a few times despite the clear absence of traffic, and disappearing down a lane between the cottages. It was really happening. This was actually it. This was the pub life. This was a dream made reality. This is so very weird, she said into the night. So very weird. A group of 3 left the pub then, too. 2 women and a man. They smiled at Nora as they walked past. We'll win next time, one of the women said. Yeah, replied Nora. There's always a next time. She walked up to the pub and peeked through the window. It seemed empty inside, but the lights were still on. That group must have been the last to leave. The pub looked very inviting, warm and characterful. Small tables and timber beams and a wagon wheel attached to a wall. A rich red carpet and a wood-paneled bar full of an impressive array of beer pumps. She stepped away from the window and saw a sign just beyond the pub, past where the pavement became grass. Quickly, she trotted over and read what it said. Littleworth welcomes careful drivers. Then she noticed in the top center of a sign a little coat of arms around which orbited the words, Oxfordshire County Council. We did it, she whispered to the country air. We actually did it. This was a dream Dan had first mentioned to her while walking by the Seine in Paris, eating macarons they had bought on the Boulevard St. Michel. A dream not of Paris, but of rural England where they would live together. A pub of the Oxfordshire countryside. When Nora's mum cancer aggressively returned, reaching her lymph nodes and rapidly colonizing her body, that dream was put on hold and Dan moved with her from London back to Bedford. Her mum had known of their engagement and planned to stay alive long enough for the wedding. She had died 4 months too soon. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the life. Maybe this was first time lucky or second time lucky. She allowed herself an apprehensive smile. She walked back along the path and crunched over the gravel, heading towards the side door of the drunken, whiskery man in the wax jacket had recently departed from. She took a deep breath and stepped aside. It was warm and quiet. She was in some kind of hallway or corridor, terracotta floor tiles, low wood paneling, and above, wallpaper full of illustrations of sycamore leaves. She walked down the little corridor and into the main pub area, which she had peeked at through the window. She jumped as a cat appeared out of nowhere. An elegant, angular chocolate Burmese purring away. She bent down and stroked it and looked at the engraved name on the disc attached to the collar. Voltaire. A different cat with the same name. Unlike her dear beloved ginger tabby, she doubted this Voltaire was a rescue. The cat continued to purr. Hello, Volts number 2. You seem happy here. Are we all as happy as you? The cat purred a possible affirmation and rubbed his head against Nora's leg. She picked him up and went over to the bar. There was a row of craft beers on the pumps, stouts and ciders, and pale ales and IPAs. Viker's favorite. Lost and Found, Miss Marple, Sleeping Lemons, Broken Dream. There was a charity tin on the bar for butterfly conversation. She heard the sound of clinking glass, as if a dishwasher was being filled. Nora felt anxiety constrict her chest, a familiar sensation. Then, a spindly 20-something man in a baggy rugby top popped up from behind the bar, hardly giving any attention to Nora as he gathered the last remaining used glasses and put them in the dishwasher. He switched it on, then pulled down his coat from a hook, put it on, and took out some car keys. Bye, Nora. I've done the chairs and wiped all the tables. Dishwasher's on. Ah, thanks. Till Thursday. Yes, Nora said, feeling like a spy about to have her cover blown. See ya. A moment after the man left, She heard footsteps rising up from somewhere below, heading across the tile she had just walked down, coming down from the back of the pub. And then he was there. He looked different. He looked different. The beer had gone, and there were more wrinkles around his eyes, dark circles. He had a nearly finished pint of dark beer in his hand. He still looked a bit like a TV vet, just a few more series down the line. Dan, she said, as if he was something that needed identifying, like a rabbit by the road. I just want to say I'm so proud of you. So proud of us. He looked at her blankly. Was just turning the chiller units off. Gotta clean the lines tomorrow. We've left it a fortnight. Nora had no idea what he was talking about. She stroked the cat. Yes, of course. The lines. Her husband, for in this life that was who he was, looked around at all the tables and upside-down chairs. He was wearing a faded Jaws t-shirt. Have Blake and Sophie gone home? Nora hesitated. She sensed he was talking about the people who worked for them. The young man in the baggy rugby top was presumably Blake. That there didn't seem to be anyone else around. Yeah, she said, trying to sound natural despite the fundamental bizarreness of the circumstances. I think they have. They were pretty on top of things. Cool. She remembered buying him the Jaws t-shirt on his 26th birthday. 10 years previously. The answers tonight were something else. One of the teams, that one Pete and Jolly were on, thought Maradona painted the Sistine ceiling. Nora nodded and stroked Folt's number 2, as if he had any idea who on earth Pete and Jolly were. To be fair, it was a tricky one tonight. Might take them from another website next time. I mean, who actually knows the name of the highest mountain in the Karawatsad Range? Karakoram? Nora asked. That would be K2. Well, obviously you know, he said, a little too abruptly, a little too tipsily. It's the kind of thing you would know, because while most people were into rock music, you were into actual rocks and stuff. Hey, she says, I was literally in a band. A band. She remembered then that Dan had hated her being in. He laughed. She recognized the laugh, but didn't entirely like it. She had forgotten how often during her relationship Dan's humor hinged on other people, especially Nora. When they'd been together, she had tried not to dwell on his aspect of his personality. She had so many other aspects. He had been so lovely to her mom when she was ill, and he could talk at ease about anything. He was so full of dreams about the future. He was attractive and easy to be around, and he was passionate about art and always stopped to chat the homeless. He cared about the world. A person was like a city. You couldn't let a few less desirable parts but put you off the whole. There may be bits you don't like, a few dodgy side streets and suburbs, but the good stuff makes it worthwhile. He had listened to a lot of annoying podcasts that he thought Nora should listen to, and laughed in a way that grated on her, and gargled loudly with mouthwash. And yes, he hogged the duvet and could occasionally be arrogant in his opinions on art and film and music, but there was nothing overtly wrong with him. Well, now that she thought about it, he'd never been supportive of her music career and had advised her that being in the labyrinths and singing in music deal would be bad for her mental health and that her brother was being a bit selfish. But at the time, she had viewed that not so much as a red flag, but a green one. Her thinking wasn't bothered about fame and superficialities and could help navigate the waters of life. And so, when he had asked her to marry him in the cocktail bar on the top floor of the Oxo Tower, she had agreed, and maybe she had always been right to agree. He stepped forward into the room, placed his pint down momentarily, and was now on his phone looking up better pub quiz questions. She wondered how much he had drunk tonight. She wondered if the dream of owning a pub had really been a dream of drinking an endless supply of alcohol. What is the name of a 20-sided polygon? I don't know, Nora lied, not wanting to risk a similar reaction to the one she'd received a moment ago. He put the phone in his pocket. We did well, though. They all drank loads tonight, not bad for a Tuesday. Things are looking up. I mean, there's something to tell the bank tomorrow. Maybe they'll give us an extension on the loan. He stared at the beer in his glass, swirled it around a little, then downed it. Though I've got to tell AJ to change the lunch menu. No one in Lilworth wants to eat candied beetroot and broaded bean salad and corn cakes. This isn't pissing Fitzrovia, and I know they're going down well, but I think those wines you chose aren't worth it, especially the Californian ones. Okay? He turned and looked behind him. Where's the board? What? That chalkboard. Thought you'd write it in? So that was what she had been upset for. No, I'm gonna do it now. Thought I saw you go out. Nora smiled away her nerves. Yes, well, I did. I had to. I was worried about her cat. Voltaire. I couldn't find him, so I went down outside to look for him, and then I found him, didn't I? Dan was back behind the bar, pouring himself a scotch. He seemed to sense she was judging him. This is only my fourth, maybe. It's quiz night. You know, I get nervous during the compering, and it helps me be funny, and I was funny. Don't you reckon? Yes, very funny. Total funniness. His face fell into a serious mode. I saw you talking to Erin. What did she say? Nora wasn't sure how best to answer this. Nothing much. The usual stuff, you know, Erin. The usual stuff? I didn't think you'd ever spoken to her before. I meant the usual stuff that people say, not what Erin says. Usual people stuff. How's Will doing? Really well, our guest. He says hi. Dan's eyes popped wide with surprise. Really? Nora had no idea what to say. Maybe Will was a baby. Maybe Will was in a coma. Sorry, no, he didn't say hi. Sorry, I'm not thinking. Anyway, I'll go and get the board. She put the cat down on the floor and headed back out. This time she noticed something she had missed on entering. A framed newspaper article from the Oxford Times with a picture of Nora and Dan standing outside the Three Horseshoes. Dan had his arm around her. He was wearing a suit she had never seen before, and she was in a smart dress she would never have worn. She rarely wore dresses in her original life. Pub owners make dream a reality. They had, according to the article, bought the pub cheaply and in a neglected state, and then renovated with a mix of modest inheritance, Dan's, and savings and bank loans. The article presented a success story, though it was 2 years old. She stepped aside, wondering whether her life could really be judged from just a few minutes after midnight on a Tuesday. Or maybe that was all you needed. The wind was picking up. Standing out that quiet village street, the guest pushed the board a little along the path, nearly toppling it over. Before she picked it up, she felt a buzz from her phone in a pocket. She hadn't realized it was in there. She pulled it out, a text message from Izzy. She noticed that her wallpaper was a photo of herself and Dan somewhere hot. She unlocked the phone using facial recognition and opened their message. It was a photo of a whale rising high out of the ocean, the white spray soaking the air like a burst of champagne. It was a wonderful photo, and just seeing it caused her to smile. As he was typing, another message appeared. This was the one of pics I took yesterday from the boat. And another, humpback mother, and another photo, 2 whales this time, their backs breaking the water, with calf. The last message also included emojis of whales and waves. Nora felt a warm glow, not just from the pictures, which were indisputably lovely, but from the contact with Izzy. When Nora backed out of her wedding to Dan, Izzy had insisted that she come to Australia with her. They'd mapped it all out, a plan to live near Byron Bay and get jobs on one of the whale-watching boat cruises. They had shared lots of clips of humpback whales in anticipation of this new adventure. But then, Nora had wobbled and backed out, just like she had backed out of a swimming career and a band and a wedding. But unlike those other things, there hadn't even been a reason. Yes, she had started working at String Theory, and yes, she felt the need to tend to her parents' graves, but she knew that staying in Bedford was the worst option, and yet she picked it because of some strange protective homesickness that festered alongside a depression that told her, ultimately, she didn't deserve to be happy. That she had hurt Dan and a life of drizzle and a depression in her hometown was her punishment, and she hadn't the will or clarity or, hell, the energy to do anything. So, in fact, she swapped her best friend for a cat. In her actual life, she had never fallen out with Izzy. Nothing that dramatic, but after Izzy had gone to Australia, things had faded between them until their friendship became just a vapor trail of sporadic Facebook and Instagram likes and emoji-filled birthday messages. She looked back through the text. Conversation between her and Izzy and realized that even though there was still 10,000 miles between them, they had a much better relationship in this version of things. When she returned to the pub, carrying the sign this time, Dan was nowhere to be seen, so she locked the back door and waited a while in the pub hallway, working out where the stairs were and unsure if she actually wanted to follow her tipsy sort of husband up there. She found the stairs at the rear of the building, through a door that said staff only. As she stepped on the bridge of a carpet heading towards the stairs, just after a framed poster of Things You Learn in the Dark, of one of their favorite Ryan Bailey movies which they had watched together at the Odeon in Bedford, she noted a smaller picture on a sweet little windowsill. It was their wedding photo, black and white, reporter style, walking out of a church into a shower of confetti. It was difficult to see their faces properly, but they were both laughing, and it was a shared laugh, and they seemed, as far as a photograph can tell you anything, to be in love. She remembered her mom talking about Dan. He's a good one. You're so lucky. Keep hold of him. She saw her brother Joe too, shaven-headed and looking genuinely happy, champagne glass in hand, and his short-lived, disastrous investment banker boyfriend, Lewis, by his side. As he was there, and Ravi, too, looking more like an accountant than a drummer, standing next to a bed-speckled woman she had never seen before. While Dan was in the toilet, Nora located the bedroom. Although they evidently had money worries, the nervous appointment with the bank confirmed that the room was expensively furnished. Smart window blinds, a wild, comfortable-looking bed, the duvet crisp and clean and white. There were books either side of the bed. In her actual life, she hadn't had a book by her bed for at least 6 months. She hadn't read anything for 6 months. Maybe in this life she had a better concentration span. Hi guys. She picked up one of the books, Meditation for Beginners. Underneath there was a copy of a biography of her favorite philosopher, Henry David Thoreau. There were books on Dan's bedside table too. The last book she remembered him reading had been a biography of Tullus Lartigue, Tiny Giant, but in this life he was reading a business book called Zero to Hero, Harnessing Success in Work, Play, and Life, and the latest edition of the Good Pup Guide. Hi, Anyo. She felt different. And her body a little healthier, a little stronger, but tense. She patted her stomach and realized that this life she worked out a bit more. Her hair felt different too. She had a heavy fringe, and feeling it, she could tell her hair was longer at the back. Her mind felt a little woozy. She must have had at least a couple of glasses of wine. A moment later, she heard the toilet flush. Then she heard gargling. It seemed to be a bit noisier than necessary. Are you all right? Dan asked when he came into the bedroom. His voice, she realized, didn't sound like she remembered. It sounded emptier, a bit colder. Maybe it was tiredness, maybe it was stress, maybe it was beer, maybe it was marriage, maybe it was something else. It was hard to remember exactly, but what she had sounded like before, what he had been like precisely, but that was the nature of memory. At university, he had done an essay drill titled The Principles of Hobbesian Memory and Imagination. Thomas Hobbes had viewed memory and imagination as pretty much the same thing, and since discovering that, she had never entirely trusted her memories. Outside the window, the street lamp's yellow glow illuminated the desolate village road. Nora, you're acting strange. Why are you just standing in the middle of the room? Are you getting ready for bed, or are you doing some kind of standing meditation? He laughed. He thought he was funny. He went over to the window and pulled the curtains. Then he took off his jeans and put them on the back of the chair. She stared at him and tried to feel the attraction she had once felt so deeply. It seemed to require a Herculean effort. She hadn't expected this. Everyone's lives could have ended up in an infinite number of ways. He collapsed heavily on the bed, a whale, into the ocean. Picked up Zero to Hero, tried to focus, put it down, picked up a laptop up by the bed, shoved an earphone into his ear. Maybe he was going to listen to a podcast. I'm just thinking about something. She began to feel faint, as if she was only half there. She remembered Mrs. Ellum talking about how disappointment in a life would bring her back to the library, and would feel, she realized, altogether too strange to climb into the same bed with a man she hadn't seen for 2 years. She noticed the time of the digital alarm clock, 12:23. Still with the earphone in his ear, looked at her again. Right, listen, if you don't want to make babies tonight, you can just say, What? I mean, I know we'll have to wait another month until you're ovulating again. We're trying for a baby. I want a baby? Nora, what's with you? Why are you strange today? She took off her shoes. I'm not. A memory came to her, related to the Jaws t-shirt. A tune, actually. Beautiful sky. The day she had bought Dan the Jaws t-shirt and had been the day she had played him a song she had written for the Labrans. Beautiful sky it was. She was convinced. With Happy, the best song she had ever written. And more than that, it was a happy song to reflect her optimism at that point of her new life. It was a song inspired by her new life with Dan, and he had listened to it with a sluggish indifference that had hurt at the time and which she would have addressed if it hadn't been his birthday. Yeah, Pete said. It's okay. She wondered why that memory had stayed buried, only to rise up now like the great white shark on his fading t-shirt. There were other things coming back on her now, too. His over-the-top reaction when she'd once told him about a customer, Ash, the surgeon and amateur guitar player who came into string theory for the occasional songbook, casually asking Nora if she wanted to go for a coffee sometime. Of course I said no, stop shouting. Worse, though, was when an A&R man for a major label, or rather, a boutique former indie label with Universal behind them, wanted to sign the Labrans. Dan had told her that it was unlikely they'd survive as a couple. He'd also heard a horror story from one of his university friends who'd been in a band that signed a label, and then the label ripped them off, and they'd all become unemployed alcoholics or something. I could take you with me, she said. I'd get in the contract. We could go everywhere together. Sorry, Nora, but it's your dream, not not mine. Which hurt even more with hindsight, knowing how much for the wedding she tried to make his dream of a pub and the Oxfordshire countryside become her dream as well. Dan had always said his concern was for Nora. She'd been having panic attacks while she was in the band, especially when she got anywhere near stage. But the concern had been at least a little manipulative. Now she thought about it. I thought he was saying now that you are starting to trust me again. Trust you? Dan, why wouldn't I trust you? You know why. Of course I know why, she lied. I just want to hear you say it. Well, since this stuff with Aaron? She stared at him like he was a raw sketch, ink blot in which she saw no clear image. Aaron, the one I was speaking to tonight? Am I going to be beaten up forever about one stupid drunken moment? On the street outside, the wind was getting stronger, howling through trees as if attempting a language. This was the life she had been in mourning for. This was the life she had beaten herself up for not living. This was the timeline she thought she had regretted not existing in. One stupid mistake, she echoed. Okay, 2. It was multiplying. 2. I was in a state, the pressure of this place, and I was very drunk. You had sex with someone else, and it doesn't seem you have been seeking much atonement. Seriously, why drag all this up? We've been through this. Remember what the counselor said about focusing on where we wanted to go rather than where we have been. Do you ever think that maybe we just aren't right for each other? What? I love you, Dan. And you could be a very kind person. And you were great with my mom, and we have great conversations. But do you ever feel that we passed where we were meant to be? That we changed? She sat down on the edge of the bed, the furthest corner away from him. Do you ever feel lucky to have me? Do you realize how close I was to leaving you 2 days before the wedding? Do you know how messed up you would have been if I hadn't turned up at the wedding? Wow. Really? You have yourself in quite high esteem here, Nora. Shouldn't I? Shouldn't everyone? What's wrong with self-esteem? And besides, it's true. There's another universe where you send me WhatsApp messages about how messed up you were without me. How you turned to alcohol, although it seems like you turned to alcohol with me too. You send me texts saying you miss my voice. You made a dismissive voice somewhere between a laugh and a grunt. Well, right now, I am most definitely not missing your voice. She couldn't get beyond her shoes. She found it hard, maybe impossible, to take off another item of clothing in front of him and stop going on about my drinking. I am a country landlord, scoffed Dan. It's what country landlords do. To be jovial and merry and willing to partake in the many and manifold beverages we sell. Jeez. Since when did he speak like this? Did he always speak like this? Bloody hell, Dan. He didn't even seem bothered, seem grateful in any way for the universe he was in. The universe she had felt so guilty for not allowing to happen. He reached for his phone, still with his laptop on the duvet. Nora watched him as he scrolled. Is this what you imagined? Is the dream working out? Nora? Let's not do this heavy shit. Just get to bloody bed. Are you happy, Dan? No one's happy, Nora. Some people are. You used to be. You used to light up when you talked about this, the pub, before you had it. This is the life you dreamed of. You wanted me and you wanted this, and yet you've been unfaithful. And you drink like a fish, and I think you only appreciate me when you don't have me, which is not a great trait to have. What about my dreams? He was hardly listening. Or trying to look like he wasn't. Big fires in California, he said almost to himself. Well, at least we're not there. He put the phone down, folded his laptop. You coming to bed or what? She had shrunk for him. But he still hadn't found the space he needed. No more. I go Sagan. She told him. What? Quiz. Earlier. The 20-sided polygon. Well, a 20-sided polygon is called an icosagon. I knew the answer, but didn't tell you because I didn't want you to mock me. And now I don't really care because I don't think me knowing something like you don't should bother you. And also, I'm going to the bathroom. And she left Dan with his mouth open and trod gently on the wide floorboards out of the room. She reached the bathroom, switched a light on. There were tingles in her arms and legs and torso like electric static in search of a station. She was fading out. She was sure. There wasn't long left here. The disappointment was complete. It was an impressive bathroom. There was a mirror. She gasped at her reflection. She looked healthier, but also older. Her hair made her look like a stranger. This was not the life she imagined it to be. And Nora wished herself in the mirror good luck. And the moment after that, she was back, somewhere inside the Midnight Library, and Mrs. Elmo staring at her from a small distance away with a curious smile. Well, how did that go? 까지 노라라고 하는 인물의 첫 번째 전생이라고 할까요? 전생 같은 거였어요. 전생보다 첫 번째 회귀인 거지. 첫 번째 회귀. 아까 얘기했듯이 노라라는 인물이 지금 이제 삶과 죽음 사이에 있는 라이브러리, 도서관이라는 곳에 지금 갔다가 이전에 내가 사귀었던 전 남자친구와 결혼을 해서 살았다면 어땠을까라는 생각을 하고 있었던 상태거든요. 그렇게 해서 그때 이제 나의 선택을 바꿔서 인생을 살고 있는 내 다른 또 다른 나의 자아라고 할까? 또 다른 나의 상태에 가서 지금 살아봤는데 별로였어. 별로였던 거야. 생각했던 것보다 너무 별로였던 거죠. 일단 책 읽고 있는 동안 오셨던 분들 다들 안녕하세요. 어서 오시고요. 별로였던 것까지의 내용인가요? 아니요. 별로였던 거는 일단 별로였고요. 한번 크게 싸워요. 부부싸움을 합니다. 부부싸움을 하고 결국 다시 그 삶과 죽음의 경계인 도서관에 다시 돌아가기로 마음을 먹어요. 혹시 ASMR 탭에서 저를 처음 보신 분들께 인사 한번 드리겠습니다. 안녕하십니까. 저는 원래 노래를 주력으로 하고 있어요. 노래를 주력으로 하는 김카키라고 하고요. 가끔 가다가 밤늦게 한 번씩 와서 영어 책을 읽어드리는데 지금 현재 The Midnight Library라고 하는 책을 읽어드리고 있습니다. 1시간 정도 읽었던 것 같은데요. 두 번째 회귀를 하기 전에 로라가 두 번째 회귀를 하기 전에 잠깐 화장실 갔다가 오겠습니다. 다들 조금만 기다려. 다녀올게. 짠! 그렇습니다. 고민 중인 게 지금 ASMR 모드로 안 켜놓고 말을 하고 있단 말이에요. 이거 판타지였네요. 맞아요. 이걸 한번 켜볼까? 지금 이게 그거란 말이야? ASMR 모드로 마이크를 바꿔놓은 거거든요. 좀 더 잘 들리십니까? 아니면은 아깝게도 와요? 이게 더 나아요? 이게 더 나으면 이걸로 해줄게. 느낌이 달라요? 어떻게 다르죠? 선명해요. 뭐가 더 맛있어요? 더 맛있는 걸로 해줄게. 더 가까워? 더 가까운 걸로 할까요? 그래. 오케이. 가볼까요? 읽다 말았던 The Midnight Library 읽어보겠습니다. The penultimate update Nora had posted before she found it herself between life and death. Do you ever think, how did I end up here? Like you are in a maze and totally lost, and it's all your fault because you were the one who made every turn. And you know that there are many routes that could have helped you out because you hear all the people on the outside of the maze who made it through. And they are laughing and smiling. And sometimes you get a glimpse of them through the hedge, a fleeting shade through the leaves, and they seem so damn happy to have made it, and you don't resent them, but you do resent yourself for not having their ability to work it all out. Do you? Or is this maze just for me? P.S. My cat died. Next chapter, the chessboard. The shelves of the Midnight Library were quite still again, as if their movement had never been even a possibility. Nora sensed that they were in a different proportion of the library now, not a different room as such, as there seemed to be only one infinity-last room. It was difficult to tell if she really was in a different part of the library, as the books were still green, though she seemed closer to a corridor than she had been. And from here she could see a glimpse of something new through one of the stacks. An office desk and a computer, like a basic makeshift open plan office positioned in the corridor between the aisles. Mrs. Ellen wasn't at the office desk. She was at a low wooden table right there in front of Nora, and she was playing chess. It was different to how I imagined, said Nora. Mrs. Ellen looked like she was halfway through a game. It's hard to predict it, isn't it? She asked, looking blankly in front of her as she moved a black bishop across the board to take a white pawn. The things that will make us happy. Mrs. Ellen rotated the chessboard through 180 degrees. She was, it appeared, playing against herself. Yes, said Nora. It is. But what happens to her? To me? How does she end up? How do I know? I only know today. I know a lot about today, but I don't know what happens tomorrow. But she'll be there in the bathroom and she won't know how she got there. And have you never walked into a room and wondered what you came in for? Have you ever forgotten what you just did? Have you ever blanked out or misremembered what you were just doing? Yes, but I was there for half an hour in that life, and that other you won't know that. She will remember what you just did and said, but as if she did and said them. Nora let out a deep exhale. Dan wasn't like that. People change, said Mrs. Elm, still looking at the chessboard. Her hand lingered over Bishop. Nora rethought. Or maybe he was like that and I just didn't see it. So, wondered Mrs. Elm, looking at Nora, what are you feeling? Like I still want to die. I have wanted to die for quite a while. I have carefully calculated that the pain of me living as the bloody disaster that is myself is greater than the pain anyone else will feel if I were to die. In fact, I'm sure it would be a relief. I'm not useful to anyone. I was bad at work. I have disappointed everyone. I am a waste of a carbon footprint, to be honest. I hurt people. I have no one left, not even poor old Bolts, who died because I couldn't look after a cat properly. I want to die. My life is a disaster, and I want it to end. I am not cut out for a living, and there is no point going through all this because I am clearly destined to be unhappy in other lives too. That is just me. I add nothing. I am wallowing in self-pity. I want to die. Mrs. Elm studied Nora hard, as if reading a passage in a book she had read before, but had just found it contained a new meaning. Wasn't, she told her, in a measured tone, is an interesting word. It means lack. Sometimes, if we feel that lack with something else, the original want disappears entirely. Maybe you have a lack problem rather than a want problem. Maybe there's a life that you really want to live. I thought that was it. The one with Dan, but it wasn't. No, it wasn't. But that is just one of your possible lives, and 1 into infinity is a very small fraction indeed. Every possible life I could live has me in it, so it's not really every possible life. Mrs. Elm wasn't listening. Now tell me, where do you want to go now? Nowhere, please. Do you need another look at the Book of Regrets? Nora scrunched her nose and gave a minute shake of her head. She remembered the feeling of being suffocated by so much regret. No. What about your cat? What was his name again? Voltaire. It was a bit pretentious, and he wasn't really a pretentious cat, so I just called him Volts for short. Sometimes Voltsy if I was feeling jovial, which was rare, obviously. I couldn't even finalize a name for a cat. Well, you said you were bad at having a cat. What would you have gone differently? Nora thought. She had the very real sense that Mrs. Ellen was playing some kind of game with her. But she also wanted to see her cat again, and not simply a cat with the same name. In fact, she wanted it more than anything. Okay, I'd like to see the life where I kept Voltaire indoors. My Voltaire. I'd like the life where I didn't try and kill myself and where I was good at cat odor and I didn't let him out onto the road last night. I'd like that life. Just for a little while. That life exists, doesn't it? Next chapter, the only way to learn is to live. Nora looked around and found herself lying in her own bed. She checked her watch. It was 1 minute past midnight. She switched on her light. This was her exact life, but it was going to be better because Voltaire was going to be alive in this one. Her real Voltaire. But where was he? Volts? She climbed out of bed. Volts? She looked all over her flat and couldn't find him anywhere. The rain patted against the windows. That much hadn't changed. Her new box of antidepressants was out the kitchen unit. The electric piano stood by the wall, silent. Voltsy? There was her yucca plant and her 3 tiny potted cacti. There were her bookshelves, with exactly the same mix of philosophy books and novels, and untried yoga manuals and rock star biographies and pop science books. An old National Geographic with a shark on the cover and a 5-month-old copy of Elle magazine, which she'd bought mainly for the Ryan Bailey interview. No new editions in a long time. There was a bowl, still full of cat food. She looked everywhere, calling his name. It was only when she went back into her bedroom and looked under the bed that she saw him. Volts. The cat wasn't moving. As her arms weren't long enough to reach him, she moved the bed. Voltsy. Come on, Voltsy, she whispered. But the moment as she touched his cold body, she knew, and she was flooded with sadness and confusion. She immediately found herself back in the Midnight Library, facing Mrs. Ellen, who was sat this time in a comfy chair, deeply absorbed in one of the books. I don't understand, Nora told her. Mrs. Ellen kept her eyes on the page she was reading. There will be many things you don't understand. I asked for the life in which Voltaire was still alive. Actually, you didn't. What? She put her book down. You asked for the life where you kept him indoors. That's an entirely different thing. Is it? Yes. Entirely. You see, if you'd have asked for the life where was still alive, I would have to say no. But why? Because it doesn't exist. I thought every life exists. Every possible
life. You see, it turns out that Voltaire had a serious case of... She read carefully from the book. Restrictive cardiomyopathy, a severe case of it which he was born with and which was destined to cause his heart to go at a young age. But he was hit by a car. There is a difference, Nora, between dying in a road and being hit by a car. In your root life, Voltaire lived longer than almost any other life except the one you've just encountered, where he died only 3 hours ago. Although he had a tough few early years, the year you had him was the best of his life. Voltaire has much worse lives, believe me. You didn't even know his name a moment ago. Now you know he had restrictive cardio whatever. I knew his name, and it wasn't a moment ago. It was the same moment. Check your watch. Why did you lie? I wasn't lying. I asked you what your cat's name was. I never said I didn't know what your cat's name was. Do you understand the difference? I just wanted you to say his name so that you would feel something. Nora was hot with agitation now. That's even worse. You sent me into that life knowing Volz would be dead, and Volz was dead, so nothing changed. Mrs. Elm's eyes twinkled again, except you. What do you mean? Well, you don't see yourself as a bad cat owner anymore. You looked after him as well as he could have been looked after. He loved you as much as you loved him, and maybe he didn't want you to see him die. You see, cats, no. They understand when their time is up. He went outside because he was going to die and he knew it. Nora tried to take this in. Now she thought about it. There hadn't been any external signs of damage on her cat's body. She had just jumped to the same conclusion that Ash had jumped to, that a dead cat on the road was probably dead because of the road. And if a surgeon would think that, a mere layperson would think that too. 2 + 2 equals car accident. Poor Volz, Nora muttered mournfully. Mrs. Elm smiled, like a teacher who saw a lesson being understood. He loved you, Nora. You look after him as well as anyone could. Go and look at the last page of the Book of Regrets. Nora could see that the book was lying on the floor. She knelt on the floor beside it. I don't want to open it again. Don't worry. It will be safer this time. Just stick to the last page. Once she had flicked to the last page, she saw one of her very last regrets. I was bad at looking after Voltaire slowly disappear from the page, the letters fading like retreating strangers in a fog. Nora closed the book before she could feel anything bad happen. So, you see, sometimes regrets aren't based on fact at all. Sometimes regrets are just... She searched for the appropriate term and found it. A load of bullshit. Nora tried to think back on her school days to remember if Mrs. Elm had said the word bullshit before. She was pretty sure she hadn't. But I still don't get why you let me go into that life if you knew Volz was going to be dead anyway. You could have told me. You could have just told me I wasn't a bad cat owner. Why didn't you? Because, Nora, Sometimes the only way to learn is to live. Sounds hard. Take a seat, Mrs. Ellen told her. A proper seat. It's not right, you kneeling on the floor. And Nora turned to see a chair behind her that she hadn't noticed before. An antique chair. Mahogany and buttoned leather, Edwardian maybe, with a brass bookstand attached to one arm. Give yourself a moment. Nora sat down. She stared at her watch. No matter how much of a moment she gave herself, it stayed being midnight. I still don't like this. One life of sadness was enough. What is the point of risking more? Fine. Mrs. Ellen shrugged. What? Let's do nothing then. You can just stay here in the library with all those lives waiting on the shelves and not choose one. Nora sensed Mrs. Ellen was playing some kind of a game, but she went along with it. Fine. So Nora just stood there while Mrs. Ellen picked up her book again. It seemed unfair to Nora that Mrs. Ellen could read the lives without falling into them. Time went by, though technically, of course, it didn't. Nora could have stayed there forever without getting hungry or thirsty or tired, but she could, it seemed, get bored. As time stood still, Nora's curiosity about the lives around slowly grew. It turned out to be near impossible to stand in a library and not want to pull things out from the shelves. Why can't you just give me a life? It's a good one, she said suddenly. That is not how this library works. Nora had another question. Surely in most lives I will be asleep now, won't I? In many? Yes. So, what happens then? You sleep, and then you wake up in that life. It's nothing to worry about. But if you are nervous, you could try a life where it's another time. What do you mean? Well, it's not nighttime everywhere, is it? What? There are an infinite number of possible universes in which you live. Are you really saying they all exist on Greenwich Mean Time? Of course not, said Nora. She realized she was about to cave in and chose another life. She thought of the humpback whales. She thought of the unanswered message. I wish I had gone to Australia with Fitzy. I would like to experience that life. Very good choice. What? Is it a very good life? Oh, I didn't say that. I merely feel that you might be getting better at choosing. So, it's a bad life. I didn't say that either. And the shelf sped into motion again, then stopped a few seconds afterwards. Ah, yes, there it is, says Mrs. Ellen, taking a book from the second to bottom shelf. She recognized instantly, which was odd, seeing that it looked almost identical to the others around it. She handed it to Nora, affectionately, as if it was a birthday gift. There you go. You know what to do. Nora hesitated. What if I'm dead? Sorry? I mean, in another life. There must be other lives in which I died before today. Mrs. Allen looked intrigued. Isn't that what you wanted? Well, yes, but you've died an infinite number of times before today, yes. Car accident, drug overdose, drowning, a bout of fatal food poisoning, choking on an apple, choking on a cookie, choking on a vegan hot dog, choking on a non-vegan hot dog. Every illness it was possible for you to catch or contract. You have died in every way you can, at any time you could. So, I could open a book and just die? No, not instantaneously. As with Voltaire, the only lives available here are, well, lives. I mean, you could die in that life, but you won't have died before you enter the life, because this Midnight Library is not one of ghosts. It's not a library of corpse. Is it a library of possibility? And death is the opposite of possibility. Understand? I think so. And Nora stared at the book she had been handed. Confier green, smooth textured, again embossed with that broad and frustratingly meaningless title, My Life. She opened it and saw a blank page, so she moved to the next page and wondered what was going to happen this time. The swimming pool was a little busier than normal, and then she was there. She gasped. The sensations were sudden, the noise and the water. She had her mouth open and she choked. The tang and sting of salt water. She tried to touch her feet on the bottom of the pool, but she was out of her depths, so she quickly slipped into breaststroke mode. A swimming pool, but a saltwater one. Outdoor, beside the ocean, carved seemingly out of the rock that jutted out of the coastline. She could see the actual ocean just beyond. There was sunshine overhead. The water was cool, but given the heat of air above, the cool was welcome. Once upon a time, she had been the best 14-year-old female swimmer in Bedfordshire. She had won 2 races in her age category at the National Junior Swimming Championships. Freestyle 400 meters, freestyle 200 meters. Her dad had driven her every day to the local pool. Sometimes before school as well as after, but then, while her brother rocked out on his guitar to Nirvana, she traded lengths for scales and taught herself how to play not just Chopin but classics like Let It Be and Rainy Days and Mondays. She also began, before the labyrinths were even a figment of her brother's imagination, to compose her own music. But she hadn't really gone off swimming, just the pressure around it. She reached the side of the pool, stopped, and looked around. She could see a beach at a tower level in the distance, curving around a semicircle to welcome the sea lapping on its hand. Beyond the beach, inland, a stretch of glass. A park complete with palm trees and distant dog walkers. Beyond that, houses and low-rise apartment blocks and traffic sliding by on a road. She had seen pictures of Brine Bay, and it didn't look quite like this. This place, wherever it was, seemed a little more built up, still surferish, but also urban. Turning her attention back to the pool, she noticed a man smile at her as he adjusted his goggles. Did she know this man? Would she welcome in the smile in his life? Having no idea, she offered the smallest of polite smiles in return. She felt like a tourist with an unfamiliar currency, not knowing how much to tip. Then, an elderly woman in a swimming cap smiled at her as she glided through the water towards her. "Morning, Nora," she said, not breaking her stroke. It was a greeting that suggested Nora was regular here. "Morning," Nora said. She stared out at the ocean, To avoid any awkward chatting, a flock of morning surfers, speck-sized, swam on their boards to greet large sapphire blue waves. This was a promising start to her Australian life. She stared at her watch. It was a bright orange, cheap-looking Casio. A happy-looking watch suggestive, she hoped, of a happy-feeling life. It was just after 9 a.m. here. Next to her watch was a plastic wristband with a key on it. So, this was her morning ritual here. In an outdoor swimming beside a beach. She wondered if she was there alone. She scanned the pool hopefully for any sign of Izzy, but no one was there. She swam some more. The thing she had once loved about swimming was disappearing. In the water, her focus had been so pure that she thought of nothing else. Any school or home worries vanished. The art of swimming, she supposed, like any art, was about purity. The more focused you were on the activity, the less focused you were on anything else. You kind of stopped being you and became the thing you were doing. But it was hard to stay focused when Nora noticed her arms and chest ached. She sensed it. It had been a long swim and was probably time to get out of the pool. She vaguely remembered Dan, who had been to Australia in his gap year, talking about this place, and the name has stuck. Bronte Beach, because it was easy to remember. Jane Eyre on a surfboard. Surfboard. But here was confirmation, on her doubt. Bronte Beach was in Sydney, but it definitely wasn't part of Byron Bay. So that meant one of two things. Either Izzy in this life wasn't in Byron Bay, or Nora wasn't with Izzy. She noticed that she was tanned a mild caramel all over. Of course, the trouble was she didn't know where her clothes were, but then she remembered the plastic wristband with a key on it. 57. Her locker was 57, so she found the changing rooms and opened the square locker and saw that her taste in clothes as well as watches was more colorful in this life. She had a t-shirt with a pineapple print on it, a whole cornucopia of pineapples, and pink-purple denim shorts, and a slip-on checked pumps. What am I? She wondered. A children's TV presenter? Sunblock, hibiscus-tinted lip balm, no other makeup as such. As she pulled on her t-shirt, she noticed a couple of marks on her arms. Scar lines. She wondered momentarily if they had been self-inflicted. There was also a tattoo just below her shoulder, a phoenix in flames. It was a terrible tattoo. In this life, she clearly had no taste. But since when did taste have anything to do with happiness? She dressed and pulled out a phone from her sports pocket. This was an older model than intermarried and living in a pub life, luckily. Thumb reading was enough to lock it. She left the changing rooms and walked along a beach-side path. It was a warm day. Maybe life was automatically better when the sun shone so confidently in April. everything seemed more vivid, more colorful and alive than it had done in England. She saw a parrot, a sky boo, and banana yellow macaw perched on the top of a bench, being photographed by a couple of tourists. A surfy-looking cyclist passed by holding an orange smoothie, smiling and literally saying, "Good day." This was most definitely not Bedford. Nora noticed something was happening to her face. Could she be? Smiling, and naturally not just because someone expected her to. When she noted a piece of graffiti on a low wall which had "The world is on fire," and another that says "One earth equals one chance," and her smile faded. After all, a different life didn't mean a different planet. She had no idea where she lived or what she did or where she was meant to be heading after the swimming pool, but there was something quite freeing about that. To be existing without any expectation, even her own. As she walked, she Googled her own name and added Sydney to see if it brought up anything. Before she scanned the results, she glanced up and noticed a man walking on the path towards her, smiling. A short, tan man with kind eyes and long, thinning hair and a loose ponytail with a shirt that wasn't buttoned correctly. "Hey, Nora." "Hey," she said, trying not to sound confused. "What time you start today?" How could she answer that? Oh, crap. I've totally forgotten. He laughed. A little laugh of recognition, as if her forgetting was quite in character. "I saw it on the rota. I think it might be 11. 11 a.m.? Kind Eyes laughed. "What you've been smoking, I want some." "Ha, nothing," she says, stiffly. "I've not been smoking anything. I just skipped breakfast." "Well, see you this Arvo?" "Yes, at the place. Where is it again?" He laughed, friendly, and kept walking. Maybe she worked on a whale sightseeing cruise that operated out of Sydney. Maybe Izzy did too. Nora had no idea where she or they lived, and nothing was coming up on Google, but away from the ocean seemed the right direction. Maybe she was very local. Maybe she had walked here. Maybe one of the bikes she saw locked up outside the pool cafe had been hers. She rummaged in her tiny clasp wallet and felt her pockets for a key, but there was only a house key. No car keys. No bike keys. So it was bus or by foot. The house key had no information on it at all. So she sat on a bench with the sun beating hard on the back of her neck and checked her texts. There was names of people she didn't recognize. Amy, Rodri, Bella, Lucy P, Kamala, Luke, Lucy M. Who are these people? And a rather unhelpful contact title, simply work. And there was only one recent message from work, and it says, "Where are you?" There was one name she recognized. Dan. Her heart sank as she clicked on his most recent message. "Hey Nora, Hope Oz is treating you well. This is going to sound either corny or creepy, but I'm going to tell you all out and tell you. I had a dream the other night about our pub. It was such a good dream. We were so happy. Anyway. Ignore that weirdness. The point of this is to say, guess where I'm going in May? Australia. First time in over a decade. Am coming with work. I'm working with MCA. Would be great to catch up, even for a coffee if you're around. DX. It was so strange she almost laughed, but she coughed instead. Maybe she wasn't quite so fit in this life now she thought about it. She wondered how many Danes were there in the world dreaming of things that they would hate if they actually got them. And how many were pushing other people into their delusional idea of happiness? Instagram seemed to be the only social media she had here, and she only seemed to post pictures or poems with it. She took a moment to read one. Fire. Every part of her that changed, that got scraped off, because of schoolyard laughter or the advice of grown-ups, long gone, and the pain of friends, already dead. She collected those bits of the floor, like wood shavings, and she made them into fuel, into fire, and burned, bright enough to see forever. This was troubling, but it was, after all, just a poem. Scrolling through some emails, she found one to Charlotte, a Celtic band flautist with earthy humor who had been Nora's only friend at string theory before she had moved back up to Scotland. Hi, Carl. Hope all is fine and dandy. Pleased the birthday do went well. Sorry I couldn't be there. All is well in sunny Sydney. Have finally moved into a new place. It's right near Bronte Beach, beautiful. Lots of neighborhood cafes and charms. I also have a new job. I go swimming in saltwater pool every morning and every evening. I drink a glass of Australian wine in the sunshine. Life is good. Address: 229 Darling Street, Bronte, NSW 2024, Australia, Nora X. Something was rotten. The tone of vague, distant perkiness, as if writing to a long-lost aunt. The lots of neighborhood cafes and charm, as though it was a TripAdvisor review. She didn't speak to Charlotte, or indeed anyone, like that. There was also no mention of Izzy. Have finally moved into the new place. Was that we, or I have? Charlotte knew of Izzy. Why not mention her? She would soon find out. Indeed, 20 minutes later, she was standing in the hallway of her apartment, staring at 4 bags of rubbish that needed taking out. The living room looked small and depressing, the sofa tatty and old. The place smelled slightly moldy. There was a poster on the wall for the video game Angel, and a vape pen on a coffee table with a marijuana leaf sticker on it. A woman was staring at a screen, shooting zombies in the head. The woman had short blue hair, and for a moment Laura thought it might be Izzy. Hi, Nora said. The woman turned. She was not Izzy. She had sleepy eyes and a vacant expression, as if the zombies she was shooting had slightly infected her. She was probably a perfectly decent person, but she was not anyone Nora had ever seen in her life. She smiled. Hey, how's that new poem coming along? Oh yeah, it's coming along really well, thanks. Nora walked around the flat in a bit of a daze. She opened a door at a random and realized it was the bathroom. She didn't need the toilet, but she needed a second to think. So she shut the door and washed her hands and stared at the water spiral down the plug hole the wrong way. She glanced at the shower. The dull yellow curtain was dirty in a vague student house kind of way. That's what this place reminded her of. A student house. She was 35 and in this life, living like a student. There was a magazine on the floor next to the bin, National Geographic. The one with the black hole on its cover next that she had been reading in another life on the other side of the world only yesterday. She sensed it was her magazine, given she had always liked reading it and had been known, even in recent times, to buy it on the occasional spontaneous whim, as no online version ever did the photos justice. She remembered being 11 years of old and looking at the photos of Svalbard, the Norwegian archipelago in the Arctic, in her dad's copy. It had looked so vast and desolate and powerful, and she had wondered what it would have been like to be among it. Like the scientists, explorers in the article, spending their summer doing some kind of geological research. She cut out the pictures, and they ended up in a pinboard in her bedroom. And for many years, at school, she had tried hard at science and geography just so she could be like the scientist in the article and spend her summers among frozen mountains and fjords as puffins flew overhead. But after her dad died, and after reading Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, she decided that philosophy seemed to be the only subject that matched her sudden inward intensity, and B, she wanted to be a rock star more than a scientist anyway. After leaving the bedroom, she returned to her mysterious flatmate. She sat on the sofa and waited for a few moments, watching. The woman's avatar got shot in the head. Piss off, you zombie fuckface. The woman snarled happily at the screen. She picked up the vape pen. Nora wondered how she knew this woman. She was assuming they were flatmates. I've been thinking about what you said. What did I say? Nora asked. What did I say? Nora asked. About doing some cat sitting, you know? You wanted to look after that cat? Oh yeah, sure, I remember. Bad fucking idea, man. Really? Cats? What about them? They've got a parasite. Toxoplasm something. Nora knew this. She had known this since she was a teen, doing her work experience at Bedford Animal Rescue Center. Toxoplasmosis. That's it. Well, I was listening to this podcast, right? And there's this theory that this international group of billionaires infected the cats with it so they would have taken over the world by making humans dumber and dumber. I mean, think about it. There are cats everywhere. I was talking to Jared about this, and Jared said, Jojo, what are you smoking? I was like, the stuff you gave me. And he said, yeah, I know. Then he told me about the grasshoppers. Grasshoppers? Did you hear about grasshoppers? Jojo asked. What about them? They're all killing themselves because of this parasitic worm grows inside them to become like a full-grown aquatic creature, and as it grows, it takes over the brain function of the grasshopper, so the grasshopper thinks, hey, I really like water, and then so they dive bomb into the water and die. And it's happening all the time. Google, grasshopper, suicide. Anyway, the point is, the elites are killing us via cats, and so you shouldn't be near them. Nora couldn't help thinking how different this life was to her imagined version of it. She had pictured herself and Izzy on a boat near Byron Bay, marveling at the magnificence of humpback whales, and yet she was here in a small pot-scented apartment in Sydney, with a conspiracy theorist as a flatmate who wouldn't even let her near a cat. What happened to Izzy? Nora realized she had just asked the question out loud. Jojo looked confused. Izzy? Your old friend Izzy? Yeah. The one who died? The words came so fast Nora could hardly absorb them. What? The car crash girl? What? Jojo looked confused as curls of smoke wisped across her face. You okay, Nora? She held out the joint. Want a toke? No, I'm okay, thanks. Jojo chuckled. Makes a change. Nora grabbed her phone. Went online, typed Isabel Harris into the search box, and clicked news. There it was, a headline, above a picture of Izzy's tanned face, smiling. British woman killed in new NSW road collision. A woman, 33, was killed and 3 people hospitalized south of Cobbs Harbor last night when the woman's Toyota Corolla collided with a car traveling in the opposite direction of the Pacific Highway. The female driver, identified as British citizen Isabel Harris, died at the scene of the accident just before 9 p.m. She was the only person in the Toyota. According to her flatmate, Nora Seed, Isabel had been driving from Brisbane back to Byron Bay to attend Nora's birthday party. Isabel had recently started working for Byron Bay while watching tours. I am totally devastated, Nora said. We traveled to Australia together only a month ago, and Izzy had planned to stay here for as long as possible. She was such a force of life that it feels impossible to imagine the world without her in it. She was so excited about her new job. It was so unbearably sad and hard to comprehend. The passengers of the other car all suffered injuries, and the driver, Chris Thale, had to be airlifted to the hospital at Baringa. New South Wales police are asking anyone who witnessed the collision to come forward to help with their inquiries. Oh my god, she whispered to herself, feeling faint. Oh, Izzy. She knew that Izzy wasn't dead in all her lives, or even most of them, but in this one it was real, and the grief Nora felt, real too. The grief was familiar and terrifying and laced with guilt. Before she would properly process anything, the mobile rang. It said, work. A man's voice, a slow drawl. Where are you? What? You were meant to be here half an hour ago? Wait, where? The ferry terminal. You're selling tickets. I've got the correct number, right? This is Nora's seat I'm talking to? It's one of them, sighed Nora as she gently faded away. The shrewd-eyed librarian was back at her chessboard and hardly looked up as Nora arrived back. Well, that was terrible. Mrs. Elm sighed. Marley, it just shows you, doesn't it? Shows me what? Well, that you can choose choices but not outcomes. But I stand by what I said. It was a good choice. It wasn't just a desired outcome. Nora studied Mrs. Elm's face. Was she enjoying this? Why did I stay? Nora asked. Why didn't I just come home after she died? Mrs. Elm shrugged. You got stuck. You were grieving. You were depressed. You know what depression is like? Nora understood this. She thought of a study she had read about somewhere about fish. Fish were more like humans than most people think. Fish get depression. They had done tests with zebrafish. They had a fish tank and they drew a horizontal line at the side of it halfway down in a marker pen. Depressed fish stayed below the line, but give those fish Prozac and they go above the line to the top of their tanks, starting about like new. Fish get depressed when they have a lack of stimulation, a lack of everything. When they're just there floating in a tank that resembles nothing at all. Maybe Australia had been her empty fish tank when Izzy had gone. Maybe she just had no incentive to swim above the line. And maybe even Prozac or fluoxetine wasn't enough to help her rise up. So, she was just going to stay there in that flat with Jojo and never move until she was made to leave the country. Maybe Even if suicide would have been too active, maybe in some lives you just float around and expect nothing else and don't even try to change. Maybe. That was most lives. Yeah. Sonora, aloud now. Maybe I got stuck. I mean, maybe that's just who I am, a starfish, and every life is still a starfish. There isn't a life where a starfish is a professor of aerospace engineering, and maybe there isn't a life where I'm not stuck. Well, I think you are wrong. Okay then, I would like to try my life where I'm not stuck. What life would that be? Aren't you supposed to tell me? Mrs. Ellen moved a queen to take a pawn and then turned a board around. I'm afraid I'm just a librarian. Librarians have knowledge. They guide you to the right books, the right worlds. They find the best places like soul-enhanced search engines. Exactly. But you also have to know what you like, what to type into the metaphorical search box, and sometimes you have to try a few things before that becomes clear. I haven't got the stamina. I don't think I can do this. The only way to learn is to live. Yeah, so you keep saying? Nora exhaled heavily. It was interesting to know that she could exhale in the library, that she felt entirely in her body. That it felt normal, because this place was definitely not normal, and the real physical her wasn't there. It couldn't be, and yet it was to all intelligent and purpose, because she was, in some sense, there, standing on a floor as if gravity still existed. Okay, she said, I would like a life where I am successful. Mrs. Ellen tutted disapprovingly. For someone who has read a lot of books, you aren't very specific with your choice of words. Sorry. Success. What does that mean to you? Money? No. Well, maybe. But that wouldn't be the defining feature. Well then, what is success? Nora had no idea what success was. She had felt like a failure for so long. Mrs. Ellen smiled patiently. Would you like to consult again with the Book of Regrets? Would you like to think about those and bad decisions that turned you away from whatever you feel success is? Nora shook her head quickly, like a dog shaking off water. She didn't want to be confronted with that long, interminable list of mistakes and wrong turns again. She was depressed enough, and besides, she knew her regrets. Regrets don't leave. They weren't mosquito bites, they itch forever. No, they don't, said Mrs. Ellen, reading her mind. You don't regret how you were with your cat, and nor do you regret not going to Australia with Izzy. Nora nodded. Mrs. Ellen had a point. She thought of swimming in the pool at Bronte Beach, how good that had felt in its strange familiarity. From an early age, you were encouraged to swim, said Mrs. Ellen. Yes. Your dad was always happy to take you to the pool. It was one of the few things that had made him happy, Nora mused. She had associated with swimming with her father's approval and enjoyed the wordlessness of being in the water because it was the opposite of her parents screaming at each other. Why did you quit? Asked Mrs. Ellen. As soon as I started winning swimming races, I became seen, and I didn't want to be seen. And not only seen, but seen in a swimsuit at the exact age you are self-obsessing about your body. Someone said I had boy's shoulders. It was a stupid thing, but there were lots of stupid things you feel and all that age. As a teenager, I've happily been invisible. People called me the fish. They didn't mean it was a compliment. I was shy. It was one of the reasons why I preferred the library to the playing field. It seems a small thing, but it really helped having that space. Never underestimate the big importance of small things, Mrs. Elm said. You must always remember that. Nora thought back. Her teenage combination of shyness and visibility had been a problematic mix, but she was never bullied as such. Probably because everyone knew her brother, and Joe, well, never exactly tough, was always considered cool and popular enough for this most immediate blood reaction to be immune to schoolyard training. She won races in local and then national competitions, but as she reached 15, it became too much. The daily swims, length after length. I had to quit. Mrs. Elm nodded, and the bond you've developed with your dad frayed and almost snapped completely. Pretty much. She pictured her father's face in the car on a drizzle-scratched Sunday morning outside. But for Leisure Center, as she told him she didn't want to swim in competitions anymore. That look of disappointment and profound frustration. But you can make a success of your life, he had said. Yes. She remembered it now. You were never going to be a pop star, but this is something real. It's right in front of you. If you keep training, you'll end up at the Olympics. I know it. She had been cross with him saying that, as if there was a very thin path to a happy life, and it was great, the path he had decided for her. As if her own agency in her own life was automatically wrong. But what she didn't fully appreciate at 15 years of age was just how in regret she could feel, and how much her father had felt that pain of being so near to the realization of a dream he could almost touch it. Nora's father, it was true, had been a difficult man, as well as being highly critical of everything Nora did, and everything Nora wanted, and everything Nora believed, unless it was related to swimming. Nora had also felt that simply to be in his presence was to commit some kind of invisible crime. Ever since the legitimate injury that thwarted his rugby career, he had a sincere conviction that the universe was against him. And Nora was, at least she felt, considered by him as a part of that same universal plan. From that moment in that car park, she had felt she was really just an extension of the pain in his left knee. A walking wound. But maybe he had known what would happen. Maybe he could foresee the way one regret would lead to another, until suddenly that was all she was. A whole book of regrets. Okay, Mrs. Elm. I want to know what happened in the life where I did what my father wanted, where I trained as hard as I possibly could, where I never moaned about 5 a.m. start or 9 p.m. finish, where I swam every day and never thought about quitting, where I didn't get sidelined by music or writing unfinished novels, where I sacrificed everything else on the altar of freestyle, where I didn't give up, where I did everything right in order to reach the Olympics. Take me to where I am in that life. 방종을 하려고 그랬는데
리방이 된 것 같아요. 리방이 됐나요 혹시? 안 터졌어요? 안 터졌나요? 안 터졌나봐? 다행이다. 이 챕터 끝내고 방종하려고 그랬는데 직전에 터져버리면 어떡해. 계속 읽을게요. For a moment, it seemed as tough Mrs. Elm hadn't been taking any notice of Nora's mini speech, as she kept frowning at the chessboard, working out how to maneuver herself. The rook is my favorite piece, she said. It's the one that you think you don't have to watch out for. It's straightforward. You keep your eye on the queen, and the knights, and the bishop, because they are the sneaky ones. But it's the rook that often gets you. The straightforward is never quite what it seems. Nora realized Mrs. Elm was probably not talking just about chess. But the shells were moving now. Fast as trains. This life you've asked for, explained Mrs. Elm, is a little bit further away from the pub dream and the Australian adventure. Those were closer lives. This one involves a lot of different choices going back further in time, and so the book is a little further away, you see. I see. Libraries have to have a system. The book slowed. Here we are. This time Mrs. Elm didn't stand up. She simply raised her left hand, and book flew towards her. How did you do that? I have no idea. Now, here's a life you asked for. Off you go. Nora took hold of the book. Light, fresh, lime-colored. She turned to the first page, and this time she was aware of feeling absolutely nothing at all. The last update that Nora had posted before she found herself between life and death. I miss my cat. I'm tired. And that was page 89. Yes, I thought I was gonna read about an hour, but obviously I read for 2 hours and 30 minutes. And next time when I come back with the book, I will be reading starting from page 90. 90페이지까지 읽었고요. 저도 제가 이렇게 오래 읽을 줄 몰랐는데 90페이지까지 읽었네요. 이제 다시 바꿔. 네. 그리하여 결론적으로 이렇게 끝내게 되었습니다. 오늘 40-50페이지가량 읽었나요? 60페이지 읽었습니다. 60페이지 읽었어. 다들 자고 있겠죠? 다들 푹 자고 제가 아침에는 방송이 없어요. 아침에는 없고 아마 일요일날 휴방하고 월요일 아침에 돌아오지 않을까 싶어요. 월요일 아침에 돌아올 텐데요. 그때까지 열심히 살고 키우새들도 좀 쉬고 하면 좋겠습니다. Okay, this will be my last. It's not my last, but technically this will be my last live stream for the month, I suppose. No, never mind. Yes. 우리는 월요일 날 봅시다. 30일 날. 아침에 봐요. 다들 카바 안녕. 카바 쳐주시면 가겠습니다. 안녕. 잘했다. 카바, 카바. 다들 잘 자요. Maybe won't you take it back? Say you were trying to make me laugh, and nothing has to change today. You didn't mean to say I love you, because I love you, and I don't want to. 다들 잘 자. 안녕. Good night. Good night, guys. Bye.